This man befriended an unusual bird who did something that no one could have fathomed. Edward was exhausted. His feet dragged along the dirt on his walk home. He had gotten no sleep, and stress was getting the best of him. Some of his cattle were ill, and he was worried that their condition would only decline. Edward thought this day couldn't get any worse. When a shadow fell upon them, and his friends screamed, Edward knew today wasn't going to be a normal day. But when he looked up, he couldn't believe his eyes. Most days, it was just Edward and his cattle. He tended them, fed them, and ensured they were healthy and safe. The ranch spanned for acres, and the only human contact Edward had most weeks was his friend, who helped him every now and then. For the most part, Edward liked being with animals over humans. Then one day, Edward woke up to a strange noise coming from outside his home. Edward carefully opened his front door and stepped onto his porch. He was used to wild animals passing by as they would try and find their way into the barn and steal some food. The wood groaned beneath his feet. Edward waited, but there was nothing. Just as he was about to go inside, he heard the noise again. This time he walked down the steps and discovered a creature hiding behind a bush. But when he saw what it was, he was stunned. The creature was about the size of a turkey with grey fluffs surrounding its body and a small bald head. It looked rather prehistoric, and if this was just the baby, Edward definitely didn't want to see the mother. Was it a bird? Or an ill chicken? Of all the possible answers, this was one he never expected. The chick that was staring at him was a young condor, a New World vulture. These creatures prefer to live in windy areas where they easily glide through the strong winds. Edward knew this sighting was rare, and he made sure to keep his distance, but then it began to cry. Against all his better judgment, Edward went in for a closer look. That's when he made an unbelievable discovery. As Edward approached the young bird, it attempted to flee. However, a limp prevented him from doing so. It hobbled a few steps but then squawked and collapsed. Edward bent down and placed a hand on its back. Maybe if the bird trusted him, it would let him take a look. But he never thought this could happen. Edward immediately went online to find the best specialist of birds of prey. While many would prefer to have this bird as a trophy pet, Edward did not. His mission was to rehabilitate the animal so it could live independently in the wild. Edward never intended to tame it, but if he was going to help this bird, he needed to make it strong. Like any vulture, a condor survives by keeping its eyes on the ground for carrion. However, they prefer to feast on larger animals. Unlike their ancestors, condors do not have claws as sharp as other predators. But many still avoid these aggressive birds. Edward wasn't afraid of the bird, although he should have been. Edward went to the butcher's shop 3 times a week for scraps and leftover carcasses. He set up a nest for the bird in his shed, fearing she would be trampled by the cattle in the barn. He thought the bird would settle and heal, and she did. But a month later, Edward returned from the ranch to find that she had disappeared. He thought he'd never see her again. That day, Edward had decided to walk home from the ranch. He had a rough couple of days. A few of the cows had fallen ill, and he and his had been out the entire time keeping a close eye on them. That's when a shadow was cast above him, and his friend shouted in fear. A huge figure circled them, and they began running towards the house. Then a black mass landed ahead of Edward, its wings spanning 10 feet. Edward paused while his friend fell in fear. Then the figure ran towards Edward. That's when something clicked. Edward held the bird's face and studied her eyes before she pushed her head into his chest. His condor was back, and she had almost doubled in size. The condor was more like a pterodactyl than a bird. But why had she returned? Condors are not known to befriend humans. They only stray from their home when food is low, and right enough, Edward's long-lost condor was hungry. Edward's friend ran to the house to grab some raw steak they had been saving for dinner. But when he closed the fridge, he heard Edward shout, and when he returned, they had both vanished. That's when he heard the cows grunting, and he immediately sprinted towards the barn. Edward was sitting in the dirt beside the condor by the cattle barn. Although his friend was frightened, Edward wasn't. He knew she had just come back to check in. Edwards decided to share his story and how the experience brought him to tears. His aim was to reintroduce the condor back into the wild. Her expression of gratitude is something that has never been documented before with wild condors. The condor now continues to visit Edward on a regular basis. Edward considers himself lucky to have formed such a strong bond with this wild animal.